Hello, friends, and welcome guests. I'm your host, Wilk, of the Derate the Hate podcast, and I'm joined for this pilot episode of the Sunday Morning Comin Round podcast by my co-host and counterpart, Randy Liaz, part of the Braver Angels organization. Randy, say hello to the guests.
Hey everyone. Hey Wilk, I'm so glad to be here and to join you for this conversation, which I'm sure is going to be really fascinating.
Thank you, Randy. All right, so our conversation for this initial Sunday Morning Comin Round podcast is pro-Second Amendment versus representing, or those that represent, a enhanced gun safety measures type of mindset. Okay, so I just want everybody to understand this is not a debate, but rather an exercise in understanding each other and reaching a point of mutual clarity and basically looking for clarity and finding the humanity in the other side of the position, not necessarily agreement. So our guests today, from the pro-Second Amendment perspective, we are joined by Paul Norris. Paul, say hello. And David Iwinski. David, introduce yourself, please, for the guests.
I am a pro-Second Amendment advocate, have been for all my life, partially for practical reasons and partially for our Second Amendment to the Constitution, why I think it exists, and how it is so critical to where the country seems to be going. More than ever, the Second Amendment is going to be a bedrock that helps us.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David.
Well, Wilk, right. I didn't quite get my cue that I was supposed to introduce myself. So,
I'm sorry, Paul. Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I've been a gun owner since I was 10 years old. I was taught gun safety in the Boy Scouts. I've owned guns almost continuously since then. I'm a gun safety instructor with a whole bunch of ratings. Career-wise, I worked in tech for 30 years, and I became a counselor as a post-retirement career. And I would say that I live in California in a very progressive area.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction of yourself, Paul. Now, representing the enhanced gun safety measure side of the topic for this episode, we will first talk with Mark Beckwith. Mark, say hello to the DTH listeners and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Mark Beckwith. I live in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. I'm a retired bishop in the Episcopal Church, where I served in Newark, New Jersey for 12 years. And I came into, as Wilk indicated, enhanced gun safety after the Newtown shootings in 2012, 9 years ago this week, and helped form an organization called Bishops United Against Gun Violence, and have been working with that group ever since. In my retirement, I'm the bishop liaison, so I consult, build relationships with other faith leaders, other people working in the gun violence prevention space, and how we use language, I think, is critical in how we proceed in having this discussion with one another. So glad to be here.
Welcome, Mark. Thank you very much. And his partner in this conversation is going to be James Curry. James, thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jim Curry. I also am a retired bishop in the Episcopal Church. I served 14 years as a bishop in Connecticut. And in retirement, I've also been very active and one of the founders of Bishops United Against Gun Violence. And in retirement, I've helped to found a group called Swords to Plowshares Northeast, where we work with municipalities and police departments to sponsor buybacks and invite people to give up unwanted and unsafely stored guns. We make them into gardening tools and work with communities all through the Northeast to talk about the choice that we have about the guns we have in our homes.
Well, very good. Thank you very much, James, for joining us for this conversation. I think it's incredibly important, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot here today. Now, Randy, as I said, Randy Liaz, he's my counterpart in this conversation. He's helping to bring the questions for our guests. And Randy, just introduce yourself a little bit more. Tell me your side of this particular issue and where you're coming from, and we'll kind of introduce our format after that and get started.
Great. Yeah. So I work at Braver Angels and have been involved with the organization almost since the beginning. In 2017, I was first trained as a moderator, and I'm now a frequent moderator of lots of workshops around the country and with a lot of different organizations that we partner with and work with. And as with my role of moderator, usually my political leanings are left out of things. But I really saw this as a good opportunity to use those leanings, which happen to be towards the left and more blue leaning, more democratic, but use those from a place of curiosity to try to understand the other side's perspective, and also the multiplicity of perspectives on my own side. And I know this is not a simple issue, right? So I really see this as a great opportunity to get some more understanding. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding coming from both sides, and I've definitely heard accusations of ill will and willful misunderstanding. And I tend to think that that's not the case. I tend to think that people come at this issue with sincere convictions. And so I would love to tease those out, and I'm very excited about the chance to do that.
Well, Randy, I'm so grateful to have you here, and so grateful for all our guests today. So what I'm going to do is I will just tell you that me personally, most of the Derate the Hate listeners obviously know more about me, but I am somebody who has grown up my whole life around guns. Similar to Paul and David, I've been around guns my whole life. I've always advocated for the idea of gun ownership. I don't think that there's been a period in my life where I haven't lived in a home that had a gun in it, except for when I was in the service. The important point for me in this, and the goal in this exercise, is to bring together people of differing mindsets and find that understanding, find the humanity in both sides of the issue. And the way that we're going to do that is, again, I want to reiterate the idea that this is not a debate, but both Randy and I will lead off with a question. We will start by flipping a coin to determine which side of the topic is going to go first. We will present a question for that side to loosely steer the conversation. And that side will then have 10 minutes to articulate their position on their side of the topic. Then, after that 10 minutes is up, the other side will have a 10-minute period to articulate their side of the position based on the next question that Randy and I have prepared for that side of the topic. Now, with that said, it's not necessarily a response to the other side, again, because it's not a debate, but it's just for them to articulate their position from their perspective and make it known what their position is without having to try to combat the other side. Now, with that being said, we then will have a brief period where Randy and I will give our takeaways from both conversations, and everybody on the panel will have an opportunity to ask any questions for points of clarification or better understanding of the other side. After that, we will allow each side to then articulate the other side's position in a way that the other side agrees with. So not necessarily your average roundtable, but something I think it is going to be very interesting, very constructive, and do great things for just clarity and understanding amongst people of differing opinions and differing mindsets. So with that, we'll get going. I'm going to grab a coin here, and Randy, you call it.
Tails.
It is heads.
All right.
So with it being heads, I think I'll go ahead and start with our friends from the enhanced gun safety measures side of the issue, if that's all right. And Randy, why don't you go ahead and lead off with your question, and then I will lead off, or I will follow up with my question for Mark and Jim.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. So in preparing for this call, I was doing a little bit of research, and one thing that I found so interesting was, domestic violence is a really strong predictor of gun violence, and who might commit that from what I have read. And also I've read that domestic dispute calls make up 41% of the fatal police calls that happen in this country, but that law enforcement often seems reluctant to confiscate guns, even from those who might be legally barred from owning them, including those who might have domestic violence records. And so my question for the left-leaning folks on this call is, in terms of the focus that you think is most important regarding this issue, do you think it might be more important to focus on gun laws themselves, including laws on gun safety, which I know that that you guys have articulated is very important to you, or is it more a stronger enforcement of existing laws that you think should take priority and really be the focus on this issue?
And then just to follow up, I think that's a great question, Randy. And then I know a lot of folks on the left clamor for gun confiscation and different ways of taking guns out of the hands of criminals, but oftentimes there's not a good definition of how that can be done without taking guns away from those people who lawfully own firearms. So if it's a gun supply issue, as many from a leftist perspective or from those on the left say, if it's a gun supply issue, what policies or what does it look like from your perspective on how we could square the gun supply issue with making sure those that own lawfully own guns and lawfully own firearms to protect themselves and keep themselves protected? What would that look like from your perspective? So with that information, gentlemen, I'm going to start a timer, and you are welcome to have your 10 minutes. Thank you.
I'll get started and ask that we be introduced as people who are interested in enhanced gun safety, which I think is something that we all can embrace on both sides of the issue. And I was introduced to this, maybe 10 years ago, when I used the term gun control with somebody who'd been working in the field for a long, long time. And he stopped me and he said, please don't use that term. Please don't use that term. Please use gun safety, because as soon as you use gun control, it separates people into opposite sides of the room, and conversation is not able to happen. This is someone whose brother was an FBI agent, and I can't remember what year it was, 25 years ago or so. Somebody came into an FBI office in Washington, D.C. and killed 4 agents, his brother being among them. And that galvanized his life and framed how he has proceeded with his work in life, which is to advocate for gun safety. So I think that's a key piece. And when we start talking about the Second Amendment, I tend to try and reframe it as not a Second Amendment issue, but a public health issue. Nearly 40,000 people are killed by guns every year. More than half of them are due to gun suicides. And there are movements around the country, starting in New Hampshire, and now it's moved to other states around the country to get gun owners and gun violence prevention people working together, because it's in everybody's self-interest to reduce the incidence of suicide. So have been working at that in a very concerted way, and that is one place where I have found that people on both sides of the issue can work together. I'll give some space over to Jim to talk about his perspective.
As a clergy person, I've had to officiate at funerals of people who have taken their lives with guns, and also one of the children who was killed at Sandy Hook. I was there within hours of the shooting there. That has a major effect on me personally in terms of the kind of rippling effect that gun violence has on families, communities, first responders, police, teachers, and in the case of Sandy Hook, other children. So I tend to look at this issue as an issue of quelling the violence and engaging conversation, not about taking guns away. I'm not interested in that at all. But I want people to understand that if they have guns in their homes, then safety has to be paramount. The safety of vulnerable adults, and certainly the safety of our children. Over and over again in Connecticut and in other states, people who do not store their guns safely, the situation makes it possible for people to use those guns for violence against themselves and accidents against others. When you talk about the question of laws being enforced, or we need more laws, I think one of the things we need to do, and we certainly do this as we work with police departments here in Connecticut, is to have the conversation with frontline folk about what it means to go into a situation where a gun is possibly used against them. We had a situation in New Haven just a few months ago where police went in for a drug bust of a couple. The 2-year-old child of that couple took their unsafely stored gun and pointed it toward the police. Thank God they were trained in de-escalation, and that child wasn't hurt, nor were the police. But it was a situation where obviously people were breaking the law and the police were vulnerable. Conversations across the community between police and others in the community are absolutely, absolutely important. As you said, well, one of the questions is, how do you enforce the laws? And that's a tough position for police to be in. One of the things I work on is Swords to Plowshares, where we invite people to come to a gathering, a gun buyback. We give compensation for people who want to turn in their guns. We also make available locks and safes for gun owners who want to keep their guns and to make sure that the situation is safe for the whole household. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, one of the things I did a couple of years ago, and I've done it regularly ever since, is I went to a gun show. I'm not a gun owner. I last shot a gun when I was a Boy Scout at age 12. I can't remember what my score was. I wasn't very good, but I went to a gun show and spent a lot of time listening to the conversation. And in many ways, it was language that I didn't understand. And what it revealed to me, oh my God, this is a culture that is endemic to America, and I don't know that culture. And so many of us on the gun safety side proceed in our positions with arrogance, self-righteousness, and shame. And that just divides us even further. I began to have a deeper respect for the gun culture. It's uniquely and profoundly American. And I want to acknowledge that. Yet at the same time, as things get more and more difficult, we get more polarized in the country, gun purchases have skyrocketed, which means that there are more and more guns in people's homes that are not safely stored. The data suggests that there are 4.5 million households with children who are living in houses with unsafe guns storage. That's an accident waiting to happen. And so it's hard for me, and I think for our side, is to raise these issues in a way that the other side can hear it and not hear this implicit arrogance, shaming, and self-righteousness that comes along with it. And I've been working hard to try and train people who have a similar perspective as I do to check themselves, and to let's have a conversation here. This, to my mind, is a public health crisis. When we start devolving to the Second Amendment, then it becomes a very difficult conversation because people get locked in, and my experience is it's very hard for one side or the other to listen. But we're in a public health crisis now.
Mark, can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a public health crisis?
Public health crisis is that, that gun deaths have escalated over the past 10 years. It was when we did a witness in the Episcopal Church 5 years ago, the annual gun death rate was $30,000 a year. We're $30,000 a year. Now we're at 40,000. That's a crisis. That's a crisis, and that doesn't include the number of people who are injured by guns. And as Jim said, when there is a gun shooting, there's the person who either gets injured or loses their life, but it ripples out into the community and creates a level of trauma that is hard to deal with because we spend all our time arguing about whether we can have a gun or not. Can we work together to try and make our communities safer? One way to do that is to approach gun manufacturers who have a vested interest in selling more guns. Can we ask gun manufacturers to invest in the communities where there is gun violence? We did this 30 years ago with banks, with the Community Reinvestment Act, asking banks to invest in the communities where they were. We can do that with gun manufacturers. I just was given the sign. So more to be said. Thank you.
So great, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. And Randy, I'll turn it over to you. Give me your main takeaway from Mark and Jim's conversation.
Yeah, it's very clear that each of them is really focused on the way that their point of view is being communicated, and that I think there is a very strong understanding that a lot of the ways that, especially when it becomes about the Second Amendment and it becomes about potential confiscation of weapons, it is incredibly alienating to a lot of people on the right. And I think that both Mark and Jim really understand that deeply and understand the negatives that come from that, and are trying very hard to avoid that unintended consequence, and really focus on the safety aspect of things, and trying to focus on an aspect that can really be a bridging aspect, because I think that as you said, there's no one who doesn't agree that gun safety is important, right? And
Right.
so to hear them frame it that way, I think it's very effective.
I think it's very effective as well. I have to echo pretty much everything you just said. It's a very, very strong way to come at the conversation when you talk about it from a gun safety issue. I've never met, I only associate when it comes to guns with those who are responsible with guns. I do not have any desire to be around people who are unsafe with guns, again, because I've been around guns my whole life. I've seen the catastrophic effects of unsafe gun use, and to come at it from a safety perspective really makes a lot of sense. And to Mark's point, when he talks about really understanding the culture and how that culture works, and the humanity behind those who are within that culture, it couldn't be more important, because I think that's one of the big things. That's one of the big reasons that I do the show that I do. That's one of the big reasons I got involved with Braver Angels. And it's the primary reason that I am doing this Sunday morning coming around roundtable. There's a quote by Henry Ford that I liked a lot. It says, if there is any one secret to success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. Finding the humanity in both sides of the issue and having a civil conversation is incredibly important, which again is why we're all here today. And I want to thank you for that. Mark and Jim, thank you for your 10 minutes. Now I will turn it over to Randy again. And what is your question, Randy, for Paul and David?
Yeah, so I do think that the Second Amendment is a really important aspect of this. And so, just to quote it really quickly, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the grammar of that sentence is interesting, and I think often leads to disagreement between the two sides, especially with regards to linking the two halves of that. And some people on the left say, well, is the right of the people to keep and bear arms totally related to the need for a well-regulated militia and things of that sort. And obviously time has changed between when the Second Amendment was written and the society in which we live. And so clearly there are a lot of people who believe that our understanding of the Second Amendment or even our regard for it should change with those times. And so my question for the right-leaning gentleman on this call is, do you think that our interpretation of the Second Amendment should change over time with perhaps the situations, the nature of weapons, things like that? For example, if laser guns became a real thing that were widely available, should that still be covered under the Second Amendment? And we know that some weapons are not widely available to the general public. So I guess my general question is, how should the Second Amendment be interpreted, perhaps over time? Should there be any shifting, any evolution of that?
And then my question for you gentlemen is, until the onset of the pandemic, violent crime in the U.S. had been steadily declining since the early 1990s. Talk about private gun ownership and the Second Amendment's role in that decline of violent crime since the early 90s, and the rapid uptick in the first-time gun ownership buyers. First-time gun ownership has drastically increased, just as Mark alluded to in his part of the conversation. Has since the onset of this pandemic, first-time gun ownership has increased wildly. Also, the amount of violent crime has upticked wildly since the onset of the pandemic. So square the Second Amendment and its role in how that violent crime had been decreasing since the early 90s. And what is your take on the uptick in gun ownership in in the past 18, 20 months since the onset of the pandemic? Thank you.
Well, I suspect both David and I are chomping at the bit right now. David, I wonder if you'd let me go first. Can't hear you, so I guess that means that I get to go first.
Meant the dog alarm was on, so please go first.
So I want to tell you a personal story, and part of the idea is I want to kind of tamp down a little bit of the tension that I'm feeling right now by telling a personal story. So, about the 1990s, I happened to have some time because of what was going on in my life. And I have this guy who's been my best friend since high school. And interestingly enough, most of that time we've been on opposite sides of the political spectrum, although we've swapped sides. So it started out, that I was, libertarian, and he was very, very deeply conservative. He belonged to YAF, for gosh sakes. Anyway, so that switched. And in about the 1990s, I was still probably on the liberal side and, a gun owner. And he started telling me, he's a doctor, by the way, a medical doctor. He started telling me about all these stories about, the studies that were showing how gun ownership is just horrible. And we just got to get rid of all these frickin' guns. And so, I actually could have been persuaded by that. But I spent a lot of time really looking at those studies and really coming to understand them. And I came to understand that, I will say from my perspective, every single one of them did one of two things. They were either cherry picking the data, only choosing that data which supported their arguments, setting aside that which did not, or they were so grossly misinterpreting the results that there was a hole that you could just drive a truck through. And that was my experience at the time, and that reaffirmed my commitment to gun ownership. He still doesn't agree with me. I doubt that he ever will, even though he does own a shotgun hidden in the rafters of his garage so that the family doesn't know about it. But he and I went on a trip through the Northwest, and I have a concealed carry permit that is no good where I live, but it's good in most of the United States. And so we took 2 guns on that trip, 1 rifle and a small handgun that I was carrying all the time in the states where I could legally do it, because in some of them I could not. And he was fine with that, and because basically he trusts me with a gun, as does one of my former therapists who said, yeah, you're one of the people who should have a gun. But of course, I cannot carry a gun because of where I live. But so, I just want to point that out. And why am I saying this? Because I've really looked at the studies, and I really question the medical model approach. I totally question that, because the medical model only sees the harm that guns do. And anytime somebody uses a gun in self-defense, and we understand from criminology studies that most of the time a citizen is under threat, an honest citizen, they produce a gun, bad guy goes away. The medical model does not see that. It is completely invisible to it. The medical model only sees the bodies and the holes. And and it doesn't distinguish whether it's the person who initiated the conflict or whether it's the person who was a victim. So I just want to say, I believe in the criminological approach, which looks at the whole thing and everything that happens, not the medical model. There's so many things I could say about this. The whole well-regulated militia thing, I mean, the Supreme Court decided that the Second Amendment is an individual right. So I don't really see that there's any point in discussing that. It is an individual right. And that is the, that has been decided by the Supreme Court. And I guess I'll just say that there are multiple gun cultures, and that's part of what goes on here. There is the culture of highly responsible people who really want gun safety and they want to be able to protect themselves, but they don't want to shoot anybody. There's another gun culture that is centered around drugs, inner city, violence, territory, and it's centered on the drug trade. And that is a gun culture. It's a very different gun culture. So I think I will shut up now and give David some time to speak. How long did I talk, David?
Don't know. we'll just work with it. And Paul, I agree with every single thing that you said. The Supreme Court has decided it. So if there was a desire for change, it would have happened already. The fact that a case was brought up and it is decided that it's an individual right, and I think that that's already kind of a closed case. If someone has a different case, they want to bring it up, they're welcome to take it to the Supreme Court. And if they want an actual change in amendment, they've got a lot of work to do against a very resilient crowd, I would say. I think that most gun owners, and I say most on a very vast scale, they do care about gun safety. I studied under the wonderful Jeff Cooper, one of the most well-known teachers in the entire world about gun safety. And Jeff Cooper had a common reflection point, which he said, you don't ever want to use your gun. You don't ever want to need your gun. But when you need it right frickin' now. That's the fallacy of all these, put it in the closet and store the bullets in another part. If someone's breaking into your home and risking the death of your family, risking the rape of your daughter, you're not going to have time to run around assembling pieces and parts. It's ridiculous. I, in my home, have probably a gun in every room. In this particular room, I've got 5, including right here in my desk, 2 very capable 45 semi-automatics that I could get in about 2 seconds. I open the drawer, they're laid out to be picked up. I'm not embarrassed or ashamed about that. And I don't go around, gosh, how dangerous. They're not dangerous because they're designed with safeties. And as he also said, the primary safety on a gun right here. This is where the safety resides. And with training. Now, I agree, when someone buys a gun, they should be trained extensively and they should practice extensively. Now, as far as the escalation in gun ownership, well, it's no mystery. People are scared. People see burnings, they see riots, they see people marching around with, going out with large caliber guns or high capacity guns. Of course, virtually none of these guns are the common language of, full automatics. In field use, that virtually never applies. I think that part of the issue is the fear that people have, that it's the folks who have illegitimate concerns, who actually go in to regions and say, well, maybe if people don't get along today, I might find a house to shoot up. They have every legal right, rational right, but they don't want it to be their house. And on the intention of the Second Amendment's purpose, they weren't writing that in a time that said, let's protect shooting, beasts, and let's protect deer shooting. Let's protect Olympic shooting. Let's protect. They were saying firmly that they wanted citizens, and it's right there in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, it says, if you do not govern yourselves well, it is your right to alter or abolish it. It's the citizen's right. So I know this is probably a shocking way to say it, but it's been said in Congress in response to these questions. It is your obligation that if the government does not treat itself with appropriate guidance, it is the people's right to alter or abolish said government, to take these folks and change it themselves. So again, it's been said in Congress, but it's the right to hunt government if government abuses its policy. There are a lot of people that don't trust government. I'm one of them. And I think we have to better government and moreover, help us talk together to find out why we believe that.
Yep. Well, thank you guys very much for your perspective. Randy, your main takeaway from Paul and David's input.
Yeah, so I think it's very notable and apparent that there is a lot of sensitivity towards questioning the Second Amendment and questioning an interpretation of the Second Amendment that that seeks to reframe it as a militia-focused aspect of our Constitution, rather than an individually focused aspect, right? So I heard that very strongly, that that the Supreme Court has weighed in and said this is an individual right, and that cannot be cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed, and that individual gun owners should perpetually have that right. So I hear that very strongly, and also that there seems to be a fear that a lot of people who on the other side are willfully misreading statistics to conform to their view of the world, and I think that I think I understand that perspective, because there is so much confusion around gun violence statistics that there's not a lot of great data, and I know that in the absence of really strong data, people can very easily willfully misinterpret data that they find. So I definitely hear that concern, and I hear the concern with taking away people's ability to defend themselves. This stuff doesn't necessarily, these arguments don't necessarily fully appeal to me. I still have issues with the things that I hear, but those are the principles that I heard being really reflected there.
Certainly, and I would go to the point. Both Paul and David spoke about our right as individual citizens to own guns. Heller upheld that. In the Supreme Court, David also talked about a new amendment to the Constitution, or repealing the Second Amendment as something that would be an awfully tough road to hoe for anybody. It's never had, since the inception of this country, enough public support to do such a thing. I think that
I
was.
interrupt you, Wilk.
Yes.
Where does that come from? Revoking the Second Amendment? I don't hear that anywhere.
No, and that's not, certainly nothing that came up in your part of the conversation or anything, but there are people on the left who have called for gun confiscation and stuff like that. So I think it's a general statement that is a legitimate fear on the part of many on the right. While it's not
Could
a part of this
could I
conversation.
perhaps clarify that?
Yeah,
I
point of
think-
clarification. Sure, Paul, go ahead.
I think at least what I see is so much harassment that the right becomes essentially meaningless. And California is well on the way to accomplishing that.
Well, it seems to me that one of the challenges that we have is to address the sense that the data bears out that many gun owners fear that somebody's want to take away their guns.
And
that's a non-starter because it's not it's
just not
it
going to
won't
happen.
fly.
It's just not going to happen.
It contravenes what we've been as an American culture. But that said, I mean, I think the fear is that among gun rights folks, that some guns will be taken away from all people. I think we could all agree that all guns should be taken away from some people.
I can agree with that, and I think most people,
and
I think most
that's
legitimate.
something that we need to work on. And
Yep.
to that point, Dylan Roof, who shot up and killed 9 people at the church in Charleston, he went to buy a gun. They did a background check. They didn't complete it in 3 days. It's called the Charleston loophole. Because they didn't complete it in 3 days, they were obligated to sell him a gun. If that time frame had been a little bit longer, they would have found out that he was an inappropriate person to sell a gun to. And those are some of the legislative actions that I think we want to take to help make people safer.
So I just want to point out, we're totally breaking protocol here.
Right.
And if one side gets away from breaking protocol, guess what the other side wants to do?
Right.
So why don't we stick to the protocol?
Yep. If we can get back to our format here real quick. So going back to my feedback on Paul and David's part of the conversation, I think it's very legitimate. What Paul said as far as, his inability to have a gun where he lives or carry a gun where he lives to keep him and his family safe the way that he would like to, the way that, the way that the Second Amendment provides for, and I think that's unfortunate. I also think it's very important, the points that David made, where the safety measures put in place, and the number one safety measure being his brain and or any individual gun owner's brain, and the safety protocols that they put in place. I think that jives very well with what Jim and Mark were saying. Now, we got a little bit sidetracked there, and that's to be expected, especially for the first go round with what we're trying to do here. I do want to try and get us back on format, and if there is any point of clarification, just simply based on anything that anybody on the panel said, if there's anything that anybody has for a point of clarification or better understanding, if you could please ask that question to whoever it is that you'd like that clarity and understanding from, and let's get a brief answer before we dive into the second part of this, and that's for each side to clarify and articulate the other side's position in a way that they would agree with. So just show of hands, anybody have a clarity question, a point of clarification or better understanding?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Mark.
Paul, you mentioned the medical model approach. I was talking about public health. Do you see those as one and the same? Because I'm not sure that I do, but help me out with that.
I absolutely see them as one and the same.
Okay.
My experience is that doctors hate and fear guns. And so when doctors do research, it almost ends up being biased. So yeah, the public health model is done by doctors. The CDC was the creator of a whole lot of the first round of really bad gun research.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you for that clarification. Anybody else with a question for clarification? All right, I will.
Actually, well, can I just pitch in? I feel like, I don't know if, and I'm threatening to break format myself here, but I'm aware of it. I just noticed, that we were getting off to a place where we could have found common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something happened where that went away.
Okay.
And I just want to notice that right
Okay.
here. I mean, I was hearing a lot of things that I could really agree with. And, somehow we've gotten off track from that. So I guess I just want to make that observation.
Okay. And I would love to, after the show, I would love and everybody's feedback on how we could have done things better, because this is, as I stated, an experiment and something that I want to make very better, or very much, a better way to communicate, and a great thing that we can all be part of going forward. So thank you for that, Paul, and I would love to get some more feedback on that after the fact, for sure. So, Paul or Randy, which side should we have clarify first, or articulate first what the opposing position is, and would you like to go forward?
Yeah, I suppose it perhaps makes sense because the Reds just got to kind of articulate their position, that the Blues could follow that, get the next chance to speak, and try to articulate what they heard from the Red position.
Very well, Jim and Mark, if you got the floor for 10 minutes, if you could basically articulate what you heard from Paul and David.
I heard that responsible gun owners are responsible and take a whole lot of pride in that sense, and a whole lot of anger when it's when that responsibility is degraded or somehow said to be not sincere, or the laws are up against it. I also heard, as we talk about going back to a sort of original understanding of Constitution, I heard that one of the reasons for gun ownership is protection against tyranny of either the majority or the government. And I've heard this before. I've heard a lot of strength coming from people, a lot of emotional strength, when they start talking about the sense that we need to protect ourselves from government. So I'll stop there and let Mark go on, and I can say more later.
I heard both Paul and David say that that gun ownership is an individual right, and from their perspective, the Supreme Court has settled that. I assume that means the Heller decision several years ago, and I heard David say, and directly, and I sort of inferred it from Paul, less so, that people are scared. I think we're scared. And when we're scared, we respond in the way that tries to minimize the fear or to lower the fear. And what I heard from them in that environment, if things are escalating in terms of fear and disagreement, that it's important to have weapons at one's disposal to respond to an assault, an invasion, a challenge that maybe feel life-threatening. So the notion that the gun is what I heard is that the gun is an implement that can lower fear.
I heard too that there are a lot of different gun cultures. And I think that's an extremely important point that I'd like to talk more about if we have time.
All right. I believe, yeah, that obviously doesn't, it probably will not take 10 minutes. This is probably one of the learning curve parts of doing our first show, but for each side to articulate the side of the other. So I would now ask if we could that Paul and David, if you could give your interpretation of what Jim and Mark said in a way that articulates their position in a way that they would agree with.
Yeah, let me jump in on this, and D-Wink, set me straight if I go wrong. So I heard Mark say that he wants to reframe this as a public health issue because the terminology gun control separates people. Very concerned about deaths by suicide, where the gun is the instrument. And also really interested in getting gun owners and the prevention people together, wanting to have both sides be able to work together. Jim talked about officiating at funerals of people who had taken their lives with guns. Also, somebody who had been murdered. Maybe more people have been murdered by guns, particularly like I think a student at Sandy Hook. He's interested in the effect gun violence has on police, teachers, families. He sees this as an issue of quelling the violence. So not about taking away guns, but he wants people to understand that if people have guns in their homes, safety has to be paramount. And he's very concerned that a lot of people do not store their guns safely. And he's part of this organization that makes available gun locks and safes, and also invites people to turn guns in. Mark made a really great point, I thought, I know I'm editorializing here a little bit, but that he had gone to a gun show and realized that there was a language there that he didn't understand and was really interested in learning that language. Mentioned something that I found very touching, that people who are against gun ownership or very concerned about it often approach it with arrogance, self-righteousness, and shame, and that perhaps a deeper respect for the gun culture would be very, very valuable. Very concerned that gun purchases have skyrocketed, and more of them are being unsafely stored. 4.5 million houses with children and unsafe gun storage, and just really wants people to check themselves as this goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. Sounds
See,
good.
I do this for a living. Right? Listening to people and being able to reflect back to them what they told me in their own words, not my words.
Beautiful. David, anything you would like to add other than a ditto?
Well, it strikes me that one of the ways that might be acceptable to both sides, and that might be something that helps us come together, is that since some of the folks with an opposing view acknowledge this medical issue, right?
Mhm.
That maybe some of this is mischaracterized. A lot of gun owners do. They think it's focused on the implement,
Mhm.
not the psychology of the user.
Mhm.
I think if this were turned into what someone has mentioned, I think it was Paul, a criminology violence study
Right.
with data, that what you get out of it is something that studies the criminal aspect.
Right. Hey,
And
David, I'm gonna have you hold that thought for 1 second, if you could. We're gonna do a basically around the horn with final takeaways real quick. I just before we do that part, I just want to see. I just want to go around the board here real quick and find out from each person. First, I'll ask Randy, my co-host in this episode. Do you feel that we had each side effectively make their point and then articulate the other side's position?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to comment a little more extensively, or how would you? Yeah.
You can. I'm just going to go around real quick and just get each person's perspective, and then we'll do a full round the horn with final takeaways from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess in terms of how I experienced hearing each side kind of encapsulate the other side, I think perhaps the difference in what I heard was that I think I heard Mark and Jim give kind of a higher level overview and the aspects that I think that they had internalized in terms about of the actual the totality of the view and the theme, the tone of the view that that they were hearing from the Reds. And obviously, Paul, got to more extensively comment on what he had heard from Mark and Jim. And what I heard from him was very focused on the details of what Mark and Jim were saying about their positions, right? And so, you could tell he was very meticulous in his note taking, right? And I can see that Paul really wants to understand the the finer points of the way that Mark and Jim understand the world, and including their model of looking at statistics and kind of putting a frame upon the challenge that faces us.
Great. All right. Very good. So now what I'm going to do is just ask that everybody take a couple minutes. Jim, how do you feel about what we were able to do here today? What are your final takeaways from our experiment in understanding? Again, it's more about clarity than agreement. I think we have a lot we can agree upon, and I think everybody was very clear in what they had to say, and I would like to get everybody's point or everybody's final takeaways from what we saw today. So Jim, take it away. Give us a couple minute commentary on how you felt things went, and if you think we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish here today.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody. The setting this up for me as red-blue doesn't quite do it. And I had hoped, and it's the next section of our conversation, to talk back and forth a little bit. Because, not because, well, it goes back to what Paul had said earlier. There was a moment he thought that we had a whole lot of space in which we could find agreement and the sense of humanity and humility in the other. But we didn't go far enough into that. And I'd still like to, because basically because I can see that other side's argument. And I share some of it. So
Okay.
the sense of polar opposites didn't happen for me the way it seems to be set up in the red-blue kind of definition.
Very valid. I definitely agree with what you're saying. Mark, how what are your thoughts?
I think we worked well and worked hard, and appreciate Wilk, you and Randy for the role that you played, and appreciate the passion and the expertise that Paul and David brought to this. I felt it, and at one point before as he began speaking, Paul said it, of feeling energized. I can get into the polarity, and when I get there, it hits my ego, and that's not always the best place to engage in conversation. And I agree with Jim to acknowledge that, that we often go to those places. I go to that place, but it's possible to go beneath that, to the humility and the mutual respect and the listening. And the polarity that I think that Jim referred to sometimes gets in the way, because I then feel at some deep level obligated to defend my side. Well, my side is not one valence. It's got many layers to it. And I like to get to that deeper level where I think we have common space and common agreement.
Very good. David, let's go to you next. How what's your final takeaway, and how are you feeling about what we were able to do here today?
Well, as a first effort, I think it was actually pretty good. And I know that as I listen to it tomorrow, I'll be a little, not sure I wanted to say that, but it really got a chance to get some very different perspectives out. And I know from a read, and a passionate read, that so often I walk away from these conversations feeling that there was no progress, that there was no listening for it. And it's very frustrating, because it's very often you think that when you're trying to make common sense, what you think are common sense points, that they're taken as if, yeah, well, but you were responsible for Sandy Hook. And that infuriates me. Mm-hmm. I think tonight's conversation went much further, obviously a lot further, in the listening. And I think to the extent that that can be drawn, there's been some progress made for sure.
Very good. I like to hear that. I like to hear that for sure. Paul, what's your final takeaway, and how did you feel about what we've been able to do here today?
I mean, part of my emotional investment in this is my experience of the growing harassment against gun owners in California. And I have personally experienced, I feel this, and to the point where the right is increasingly becoming meaningless. And so I really feel that, and that's particularly happened over, say, the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So that affects my emotional valence in this discussion. Wilk, I think you picked the toughest topic you possibly could. I really do, with the possible exception of abortion. But it's just about the toughest topic to get people to find common ground. And I feel like we just scratched the surface. And I do feel like another conversation could take place with Jim and Mark, where I think, we could really end up feeling good about it and feel like we had come to an enormous amount of agreement. I mean, I completely agree that irresponsible people should not have access to guns. I believe that guns should be stored safely if that does not interfere with the right of self-defense, and that even there's a balance. So, I think we could find a lot of points of agreement. And somehow we got off the rails, and that didn't happen. So, maybe you ought to try to set up a follow-up on this, Wilk. Just a thought.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that were left unsaid here today in this conversation, and a lot more that could be accomplished between the minds that we have on this call. There's a lot to be said on this. It's a very, very complex topic. You know, people have been discussing this and debating this and mulling this over for, you know, hundreds of years. And I really like what we've been able to do. I like the panel that we've got here today. I think there's definitely room for common ground, and I think there's a lot of things that we would disagree with. You know, let me hear, Randy. What's your feedback on what we just heard from around the table?
Yeah, I think this conversation wound a really interesting path, and I did want to focus on Paul's comments about his feelings about how you know how that path went, because I recognize that, especially with Mark and Jim's approach to this issue, I think it is really something that can resonate with a lot of conservatives or people in general who feel very strongly about gun rights. And so I think that that their involvement in it, you know, set up a really productive conversation. And I really appreciate that. And I know that Paul felt that, and that you know he expressed his appreciation for that. And I also have to own my part of this, where I was the one who brought in a question about the Second Amendment, which I know is you know, it is a very sensitive point. I did that because I think that is something that's extremely important. The interpretation and the focus on the Second Amendment is extremely important to both sides, and each side has a very different conception of that and understanding of it. So I did want to focus on that, but I understand how it shifted the tone of the conversation, and that it brought it away from perhaps some of the common ground that could have been set up in the focus on safety itself, right? So I think that this group is a really fertile ground to explore that common ground in terms of safety, and to really make some progress and see how that message about safety can appeal very much to both sides. And I even saw that when I had mentioned, when I had said the red or the blue side, I think I saw the expression on Jim's face that said to me that was not the framing that he was really looking for on this, right? And I understand that, and I think coming into this, I had a bit of a different understanding that each side would be more take more ownership of being a quote red or a quote blue, right? And so I think that is different from how things actually played out, and it's something for us to consider, especially as this format, as we continue to experiment with it and learn from it. I think that's an important learning to really understand that the perspective of the guests on that specific issue.
Very good points. Very good points, Randy, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is. I think the gun safety, the gun culture, the gun everything is far more complex than anything that could be put into two boxes. It's just not going to happen. It's not built that way. There's way too many aspects of the conversation to put them in two boxes. I think you're right. I think this panel, this round table that we have, is fertile ground for a lot better conversation, or not necessarily a lot better conversation, but another conversation where we could grow from each other's different perspectives, learn from each other. And I think the big thing that I wanted to see today was that everybody found the humanity in the other side's position. That I think we accomplished. I think there is a lot a lot more that we can accomplish. But like David said, for a first go round, I think we did a pretty decent job, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys joining me for this, taking your time to be part of this pilot episode of Sunday Morning Comin Round. I definitely think it's something that I want to continue, and I think it's something that I definitely want to do a follow-up episode of this. I would love to get more accomplished based on what we started here. So with
To
that
respond
said,
to that,
yes, absolutely, Mark, go ahead.
Will, this is an offer, not a challenge. I'd be willing to do that.
Nice.
This was the idea of it, and we got somewhere. We have a long way to go, and I think I have a desire to do that, and I sense it from others as well, and I really admire the courage that you have taken to do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I came up with this idea based on several conversations I've had with people on the Derate the Hate podcast. And you talked about Dylan Roof. I spoke with Chris Singleton a couple weeks ago. His mother was one of the 9 people praying in the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, that was murdered by Dylan Roof. I've spoke with any number of people on any number of things. And one of the things that I get from those conversations is people just want to be understood. A lot of times we spend so much time talking past one another that we don't accomplish anything. People don't listen to understand, they listen to respond. And I think today we proved that that doesn't have to happen all the time. And I think there's ways that we can grow and make this Sunday Morning Comin Round show and round table better. And I know that I've learned a lot from it. And each time I do things like this, I learn more because of great people like you. So thank you very much for that. And anything else before we wrap things up and say goodbye?
Good to meet you all.
Yeah,
Jim, Mark?
David, where are you located?
What's that?
Where are you located?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about 20 miles southeast. Living basically out in the woods on a family compound. My brother and sister live right next to me. We all inherited the farm. We decided to live together. And as I like to say, it's almost exactly like the Waltons, but we swear a lot more than they do.
Well, the reason I ask is that you and Jim and I are probably very hungry right now because it's past our dinner hour.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, again, I won't hold you up any longer. I thank you very much for everything that we've been able to do here together. And I look forward to all of your feedback on what you thought of it. And I will get this all put together, and I hope you guys enjoy the publication of it. Please share it far and wide, and we'll definitely get together again.
Okay.
Sounds
I
good.
hope you feel better, Will. Hope
Yeah,
you feel
absolutely.
better. Blessings.
Thank
Great
you very
to
much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.